Hello, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Pecora back to read to you from our novel, Prince Puggly of Spud and the Kingdom of Spiff. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as Mrs. Pecora reads Chapter 10, Over Chewed Gum. When Francesca arrived at the Palace of Spud, with its one lonely turret and meadows of mud, she could tell that the kingdom was shabby at best, but at least no one cared about how she was dressed. To Franny's surprise, Puggly told her to wait when the twosome arrived at the palace's gate. "Here we are," he said meekly. "Can I give you a tour? I could show you the mud and what we keep on the moor." Franny declined with a shake of her head. "Could I maybe see something less muddy instead? Maybe your books? Do you keep them up there?" She referred to the turret that rose in the air. "Books?" Puggly mumbled. "They're not up there, no." As he spoke, his voice was halting and low. "They're in Library Hall, which is way at the back. We have tons of them there in stack after stack." As Puggly was speaking, he seemed oddly resigned. He appeared to be nervous, uncertain of mind. "You okay?" Franny asked. "You seem overly coy. It's your home. You ought to be jumping for joy." Then it dawned on Francesca the problem at hand. "Oh, I get it," she nodded. "Yeah, I understand. It's clear to me now, as clear as a bell. I'd be hesitant too. I'd be worried as well. I'd be blushing embarrassed, my confidence gone, if all that I had were my underpants on." Puggly looked down at what little he wore. Then, though he hadn't been blushing before, from the waist of his undies to the top of his head, every inch of his skin turned amazingly red. Puggly said, "No, it's not that at all, but I'm not sure we'll get to see Library Hall. See, I gave up my crown at the party tonight. My people might find that a bit impolite. They might be quite angry, at least a bit miffed. I guess you could say I've created a rift. And so," he went on, his voice papery thin, "there's kind of a chance they won't let us in." The moment he said this, there came a great clank from over the moat from the opposite bank. The drawbridge was lowered, coming down with a thud, as the gates opened up to the Palace of Spud. A crowd had assembled on the palace's lawn, every Spudlian face looking dour withdrawn, and some of them bitter, indignant, severe. "It's him!" someone snorted. "Prince Poopy is here." The Spuds were irate. They had every right. After all, they had heard what had happened that night. The driver had told them, he said, "Puggly's resigned. The Prince of the Spuds has left us behind." What made it worse, made it hurt all the more, was the very same thing had happened before. It was just like King Walter when he gave them the slip to go run a salon in the Kingdom of Hip. So the news about Puggly had caused quite a stir. Just imagine how deeply upset they all were. As Puggly and Franny crossed over the moat, the prince was quite nervous, a lump in his throat. The farther he walked, the more lumpy it got. It felt like his nostrils were tied in a knot. Halfway across, he was taken aback, for guess who was there at the front of the pack? It was someone quite old, but known to be wise, despite having clouds in both of her eyes. That's right, his great-granny, but instead of relieved, the wrinkly old woman looked rather aggrieved. "Puggly!" she hollered. "I am flipping my lid. Is it true what they're saying? Is it true what you did?" She pointed at Puggly with the end of her cane. "Start talking, my boy. You'd better explain." Puggly sputtered, but stopped out of shame. The end of his sentence, well, it just never came. Up on the steps, the shaman was perched. "Where were you, P-Man? We searched and we searched. And then we find out you're calling it quits. No way, little prince. Man, that's just the pits. Some people might even think it was rude, 'cause we love you, P-Man. Don't abdicate, dude." Puggly faltered again as he tried to convey exactly what happened in a meaningful way. But the sound he produced was more like a wheeze, like the squeak of a mouse with a mouthful of cheese. As such, it was good he'd brought Franny along. "Wait!" she stepped forward. "You've got Puggly all wrong. I know that I've known him for only a day, but he's such a nice guy. So all I can say is maybe you're angry, which is perfectly fine, but you ought to be mad at that kingdom of mine. And not merely the Spiffs, but all of the rest. They were all making fun of how Puggly was dressed. As she said this, the crowd appeared to be quelled. Their sense of resentment was slowly dispelled. Their bodies relaxed, their teeth became unclenched. The thirst of their tempers was quietly quenched. But what had been anger had started to melt. After all, every Spud knew just how it felt to be slandered, insulted, or simply ignored, to be told that their clothing was always deplored. It all made the prince feel a little less bleak, and so once again he was able to speak. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "It was never my plan to upset anybody when all this began." He tried to explain. He quickly described how the guests at the party had jabbered and jibed, how Miss Ruby herself had insulted his wig and told him his crown wasn't fit for a pig, how it made him feel worthless like overchewed gum, like a big bursting boil on an elephant's bum. That's how he felt, unwanted, naive. After hearing all that, he just wanted to leave. So of course he ran off. What else could he do? Wouldn't anyone else have run away too? "But I'm sorry," he said, "if I let you all down. I should never, ever have relinquished my crown. It's a sensitive nature," Prince Puggly confessed, "and I quite understand if you're not too impressed. It might have been better to hurry back here. It's here among Spuds where I've nothing to fear. But had I returned, you shouldn't forget, Francesca and I would never have met." He smiled at the princess who stood by his side. Her smile in return was equally wide. "It's true," Franny added. "Prince Puggly is right. If we hadn't run into each other tonight, it would have been awful. We would never have got the chance to devise such a masterful plot." She explained what they did, their ridiculous feat, how they'd sewn a disguise out of fungus and peat, out of twigs, out of moss, out of mushrooms and mold, and soon the whole laughable story was told. And oh, what a story! So silly, so daft. The Spudlians loved it. They laughed and they laughed. Even Puggly's great granny was bursting with mirth. She giggled and jiggled her elderly girth. She was laughing so hard it looked like a dance. In fact, she was close to wetting her pants. But she didn't. Instead, she dabbed at her eyes. "It's disgusting," she chuckled. "But what a disguise!" "Right on," said the shaman. "What you pulled was cool. You made that LaRue lady look like a fool. So, P-Man, I think we forgive you," he said. "And there's something that's missing on top of your head." The shaman looked up to the turret's great height, where the driver who drove to the party that night was hanging the crown by the crook of his thumbs. "You ready?" he cried. "Okay, here it comes." Then, just as before, with a pulley and crank, the crown floated down with a clink and a clank. As if on a fishing rod with the strangest of bait, the crown landed softly on Prince Puggly's pate. "Whoopee!" cried the Spuds. "Hooray and hurrah! Our prince has returned after going astray." Francesca, however, wasn't quite so enthused. She said slowly, a little bemused. She cocked her head sideways. She squinted her eyes. "Are you sure?" she inquired. "The crown is your size? It might be just me, or perhaps it's your wig, but from here it looks like your crown is too big." Puggly's great granny replied with a smile. "It's fine," she responded. "That's just our style. We happen to like our crowns big, I suppose. Anyway, he'll look better once he puts on some clothes." Again, Puggly's skin turned the rosiest pink. He wished he could hide. He wished he could shrink. He nervously giggled and started to sweat. "Oh, yeah," he burst out. "How could I forget?" Francesca said, "Ugh, Puggly, come on. Let's go inside. You can put something on. Also, I can finally get to explore that library hall you mentioned before." They drew up the drawbridge and all went inside. A wrinkly old granny, a limp in her stride, a bell-bottomed guru with a turban on top, a pajama-clad princess with hair like a mop. The servants as well and all of the crowd. They parted, they stood, they quietly bowed. Then into the palace they began to proceed with a newly crowned, half-naked prince in the lead. All right, boys and girls, that was our chapter for today. Stay tuned for tomorrow's installment of our novel. Have a great day.